All right, everybody. Welcome to NAIOP Colorado's 2021 Hybrid Education Series. Today, our program is called The New Normal, a roadmap for navigating the trends and strategies reshaping the future of real estate development. Coming to you live here from NAIOP's office. So I'm going to introduce myself. I'm John Comunale, the president of Comunale Properties. We're a vertically integrated investor, developer, manager, and also a contractor of primarily focusing on light industrial space in Denver and the greater Southwest. So a few announcements just before the program gets started. Some extra special thanks to our sponsors, the sustaining sponsor, Transwestern, the construction corridor sponsor, the Whites Company, and supporting sponsor, Paul Sinelli. And I just want to thank our sponsors for bringing this programming to our members. I think it's just really beneficial, and I wish I had joined NAIOP earlier in my career to have access to this type of information and perspective from guys like this that are sitting next to me. So I'm really excited. And first I'd like to give a brief introduction for these three guys, and then they'll introduce themselves and overviews of their business. So first we have Doug Sampson, who is a senior vice president and partner with ACME Distribution. And then Paul Ruff, managing partner of Triumph Capital Group, and Chris Viscardi, director of development with Kentro. And just a little overview of our format today before our panelists introduce themselves. It's just going to be an open discussion format, followed by audience Q&A. And all of our virtual attendance members are encouraged to submit their questions using the chat function in the live stream bar. And just to remind everyone that this program will be running till about 9 today. So to start the conversation, Doug, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and ACME and some of the type of things you guys work on?
Okay. John, thanks for having me. John, thank you for having me. Guess I better pick up the mic. Good morning, everybody. I'm Doug Sampson, and the company that I work with is called ACME Distribution Centers. What we are is a third-party logistics company, and since that name is somewhat generally used, we are asset-based. So we operate about 2.5 million square feet of warehousing just in Denver, and then we have some other regional operations across the country. The business model is based on serving customers that choose not to own and operate their own facilities. So if you think about Procter & Gamble, for example, with Pampers, they don't want to build a building, they don't want to lease a building, they hire somebody like ACME to perform the warehousing, inventory control, transportation, and delivery service for them, so that when you see the Pampers on the shelf at King Soopers, for example, it's kind of us guys behind the scenes. So we work in probably 20 different industry verticals. So I just gave you an example of Procter & Gamble. We work with medical companies, lumber, building products, apparel. It really runs the gamut. So our life is quite diverse. And I think that's probably a quick primer, and look forward to more questions.
Thanks, Doug. I'm Paul Ruff, the managing partner of Triumph Capital Group. Triumph Capital Group started an investment platform in 2012 focused exclusively on distribution warehouses in recognition of the evolving supply chain being driven by e-commerce that was just emerging at that point and becoming a big deal. And so we set out our mission to serve the logistics companies, the folks that are moving goods around the country, by providing warehouse space for them from port to doorstep. And so we've been buying and developing a network of warehouses. We have about 3 million square feet in the portfolio today, with another 1 million square feet currently under contract. And in markets, Denver, Memphis, Columbus, Phoenix, and Nashville so far. There's another dozen markets that we're going to be breaking into over time to make sure our network is complete. But the focus is exclusively, like I say, on distribution warehouses. So it's driven by e-commerce demand. Our focus is to determine where we can be located to create maximum value for the movement of goods. And that's pretty much the simple thing. We do have we don't have port facilities yet. We do have facilities in regional distribution markets, and we also have last mile facilities, one of which people in Denver might be familiar with. We call it Denver Urban Business Center. It was the old Sears building at the corner of 6th Avenue and I-25. We bought that in 2014, redeveloped it into a last mile distribution campus, and sort of became the flagship for well-located functional distribution space in a tight urban market. So we're continuing to look to do more of that. We have some other facilities like that around the country, so that's part of what we're going to be talking about today.
Thanks. I'm Chris Viscardi with Kentro Group. I'm the Director of Development there. Our main focus is, Kentro actually means center in Greek, so we really try to focus on urban infill sites. So our main company focus is we're corporate real estate investors. We have 3 different silos, really: development, build to suit for national tenants, and then investment and value add. So over the last 10 years, we've really kind of shaped, it depends the year, what we focus on more. I would say this year is much more focused on the value add, where we're buying shopping centers nationwide, mostly grocery anchored. Right now we have about $350 million worth of value throughout the nation. But from a development perspective, which is now what I mainly focus on, we have a couple exciting projects that is, I think, center in the city, which is one is at Colorado and Arkansas, the former CDOT headquarters. That's a 13-acre site that'll be vertically integrated mixed use. So we're kind of shaping and molding as the market goes. But, like we're here to talk about today, COVID and other things have kind of really impressed what changes and how do you start mitigating through things like that and plan your developments a little differently. But we can talk about that as we continue here.
Well, Chris, you got the mic, so I'm going to start with you. So let's just, we'll just keep passing the mic between the 3 of you to start for the first question. So basically, during COVID for the last 18 months, how did really COVID, impact the retail sector, and some of the changes in your conversations then versus now? Kind of walk us through that a little bit.
Yeah, no problem. So it's been really interesting. Retail has been a tough segment for the last 5-10 years. Like, it's been shaping and changing since then. I think the pandemic really started accelerating certain components of that business. Before COVID, everybody has been pushing for smaller formats, smaller footprints, mainly just driven from labor and triple net and OpEx expenses. Construction costs are rising, base rents are rising, property taxes are rising, labor costs are rising. So everybody's trying to figure out, how do I get the same sales volume out of a smaller footprint? And you're seeing everyone from Sprouts trying to cut 10-15% out, restaurants trying to go from 3 to 2,000 square feet. So I think what this did is it really just started focusing on how do I and where do I need to place my businesses. It's been really interesting of the flock to urban and density. You're seeing nationals that used to be 5,000 or 6,000 square feet, like P.F. Chang's, where they're going and trying to get into a pickup only 1,000 square feet, but you're on top of a neighborhood. Same with Buffalo Wild Wings. They're starting a new concept that is, again, they're used to that very suburban setting, but now we want to be urban and we want somebody to just be able to walk in and pick up their food and leave. I think curbside pickup is another one. There was a lot of emphasis on we need to make it convenient for our customers. We need to make it quick for our customers, and that was before COVID, where maybe you'd have 1 or 2 curbside areas. Now you go to, like, Target, for instance, in Glendale. They went from 2 curbside pickup to probably 10 or 12. And I really think a lot of this is going to stay on, because as people start setting their routine, it's more about convenience in certain regard than where the store is and what the store is. I think the others are, I think just talking last mile, I think these retailers are really starting to think about their space when they're condensing their sales floor, how do we still utilize that space and you're not just letting it go to waste? And I think it will be really focused on that last mile, and that'll probably start getting bigger and bigger, and the sales floors will get smaller and smaller over time.
And I think is for the last mile, we're going to get a lot more into that as we got some time here. So is that why don't we shift to Doug real quick from a 3PL perspective, and then go to Paul from an investor developer perspective. So Doug, as a 3PL, in the last 18 months, how has it really impacted your business and your customers?
Well, I'm not sure if you saw me when I walked up. I used to be 6'5" before COVID. Now
I was 6'6", but I lost a foot on the way in. So.
It has been a learning experience, and probably 99% of the people on the planet didn't even know what the term supply chain meant prior to COVID, because things had been very, what we term, leaned out. So we've taken out a lot of waste, and you could think about it as you could turn on a faucet and you would get water at any regulated flow at any way you wanted it, and you turned it off, you turned it on, and everything worked great. And then COVID hit. And so most of our supply chains, and I'm talking across the 20 different industry verticals that I work in, and with these pretty major companies, most of us had already planned for one diminution in something. Hey, you had a manufacturing plant go down, you had a hurricane here, you had a road get wiped out or something. None of us had ever felt the effect of what we encountered with COVID. For us, it was, the first thing was the immediate shut-off. So we also support a lot of retail stores, some big names that you would understand, and do daily deliveries. The stores just completely shut down. And then, so you have people, equipment, trucks, space, and then it just got worse. So we have paper and toilet paper companies and so forth, and all of a sudden the toilet paper flushed immediately out because everybody was buying it. Now we have an empty warehouse. The plant that makes it is shut down for COVID. And so that was probably some of the very difficult things to manage your revenue and expense flows, as well as still have to execute for those customers. I mentioned medical and some of our other groceries. We still had to keep things going, and some of our biggest challenges, quite frankly, were understanding the rules of COVID. And we do packaging lines, so again, our work is so diverse that if you were to go in and see a display in King Soopers, for example, of Oreo cookies, we're the guys that do a lot of that. And we do it with about 10 people on a line about as long as this desk. You got one COVID, all those 10 people, all your experience is gone like that. And that's okay, except for our customer says, oh no, you keep things going. So that's really what drove us crazy, is having to replace people, train people, and cover all of that.
Cool. And so, Paul, I know you like to talk about the evolution of the supply chain, which obviously has been going on for a long time. And to give everybody a little context, we did a Zoom meeting to prepare for this, and behind Paul there was a big map of the United States with pretty much every trucking route highlighted. So in your eyes, how did one is that describe what you see as the evolution of the supply chain and how COVID either accelerated that or didn't. So.
Yeah, to not belabor the point for people that probably already understand how it's been going, but briefly, the advent of e-commerce broke the supply chain in a very important way. Prior to that, the supply chain model was either manufacturer or wholesaler to distribution center to store. And now all of a sudden with e-commerce, you have to have the ability to get packages to people to their doorsteps. And in short order, that meant you had to have more warehouse space. You had to have inventory closer to the customers, but also it had a very fundamental change in the way that warehouses operate. Instead of having a dozen SKUs on pallets that were going to retail stores in your warehouse, and you replenish the inventory in that store, and you've got a week or 2 weeks or so of lead time. Now all of a sudden, we have to have individual packages coming out of warehouses and getting on a van and going to somebody's delivery door, whether that's through a 3PL, whether that's through UPS, whether FedEx or whatnot. We have to find a way to have 1,000 or 2,000 SKUs in a warehouse, and people that are shelf picking and repackaging and getting it on a van in short order to get it to somebody's doorstep. The retailers, and this is primarily folks who sell consumer products, so we're not talking yet about warehouses barbers and restaurants and folks like that, not those guys needing warehouses, but consumer product folks had to come up with an omni-channel delivery system. And that was happening very slowly from 2010s through, say, 2018, 2019. Omni-channel means you have, as a retailer, you have the opportunity to deliver goods to your customers in multiple ways, through multiple channels. So if somebody wants to come into your store, walk out with a product, they can do that. If they want to buy online and come and pick it up from the store, they can do that. If they want to buy online and have it delivered to their doorstep, they can do that as well. That's an omni-channel delivery system. And that had been evolving over time very slowly to the point where, in 2018, I believe it was, only 39% of retailers in the United States had an omni-channel system. Most of them had brick and mortar, but not an e-commerce platform. Amazon had an e-commerce platform, but no brick and mortar. And ultimately, as you're probably aware, both e-com companies are now trying to find brick and mortar companies are trying to find e-com. So there was a lot of growth as of 2018, and then when COVID came along and everybody was more or less forced to buy stuff online, whether they wanted to or not, it just exponentially accelerated the adoption of an omni-channel system. And if you wanted to stay alive as a retailer, you had to be able to figure out a way to get goods to people's doorstep. And so that really comes back to inventory. And we went very, very rapidly from the old just-in-time inventory management system to what retailers were referring to as just-in-case inventory. Have to have more stuff closer to people so that we can get it to them faster, because just-in-time isn't going to cut it anymore when the demand from e-commerce was growing so rapidly. And to give you a little context on how fast that grew because of COVID, we were projecting that e-commerce was going to represent about 25% of all retail sales by the year 2025. This is pre-COVID. At that point, it was about 14%.
Now you have Starbucks going to double drive-throughs. See how they're going to integrate that. You've got Taco Bell going to 4 drive-throughs. That's their new concept, which who knows if they actually get that built. I don't know logistically how you have 4 drive-throughs operating at once and still serving food, but we'll see how that... And Chick-fil-A, right? Chick-fil-A will figure it out. So I think that's been one of the bigger things. I think also ghost kitchens. That was starting to get popular before COVID. I think it really accelerated again of the need for product to be close to its consumers and easy to get to them. And you're seeing it. I think it's interesting. It's a lot of local regional guys kind of grab those ideas a little quicker than nationals, but you're starting to see nationals really understand the strength of that. I think Chick-fil-A is planning a 10,000 square foot ghost kitchen in Atlanta. You've got Wendy's, you have Panera going into like things called Kitchen United, which is more of a landlord programmed sponsorship. So I think it's been interesting to see how it's shaped, and it just feels that a year of break and now everybody's back and growing, but growing in a very different way than what they were, just placing new locations and the old prototype. Everything's kind of shifting.
So is to piggyback on that is you mentioned grocery, and I think Doug probably has the most unique perspective on grocery. So Doug, if you want to share a little bit about ACME's roots with grocery and kind of what it is now and
Sure.
what's it like on the logistics side for the grocers?
Well, our business, ACME, was really founded in 1947, and the roots are truly in the grocery business. And grocery is actually quite, they're probably one of the leanest industries because of the slim margin of the product itself. So way back in the 40s and 50s, they were doing a principle called storage in transit, where rail cars would come to the facilities and get unloaded, and we really weren't using warehouses as much. It was just delivering. And then our business continued to grow, and pretty much most any grocery HBC, as we call them, customer was in our portfolio. The deliveries were very easy to do because you had 3 days from the time you got an order from, and I'll use King Soopers as an example. King's would give you an order on Monday, you deliver it on Thursday. As that time is continued on into the 2000s and so forth, everything is done with our computers. So referencing the Pampers example, when you scan the Pampers at the checkout, that information goes back through Kroger to Procter & Gamble, which basically sends a replenishment signal to us. As Paul was talking about, we also do the omni-channel, so we're kind of on the bottom floor of feeling the impact of that increase. And I think our numbers that we were looking at, it seemed to be much greater than that. During COVID, it was very interesting. We were all confused, and I'm talking about when you're trying to deliver groceries, your trucks, so if you had a driver, and we'll probably talk about that later on, but if you were fortunate enough to have the labor and you had the truck and you had the groceries and you backed up and you pull into King Soopers dock, well, they may or may not have somebody there to unload you. And what would take, you have to really spend a lot of time. Everybody was changing their policies. You're allowed inside, you're not allowed inside. We're all dealing with a lot of value on these trucks, so hey, wait a second, I gotta check what's on that truck. And so we went, and we do an awful lot of high value electronics and some other very, very expensive things as well. But with all of the customers, everybody was in the same dilemma. So you had to be Gumby, whether it was just the groceries, because there's a lot more grocery guys than I've used King Soopers as an example, but there's probably 30, 40 wholesalers just in the Denver metro area alone, forget around the state or in other states that we also service. So every one of those people is going through the same dilemma that we were. And we just had tons of people on the phones communicating. We didn't, some you have to do email, but we were trying to connect and get a person to talk to, because actually exercising and doing the execution was really paramount for us to make sure everything got delivered. And so now that things have stabilized somewhat, and we'll get on to that.
Yeah.
But
and so we'll go to Paul. And so keeping on who's growing. So Paul, you have a pretty unique perspective that you have kind of a portfolio that's very geography. So who have you seen that's kind of growing and who's shrinking type of thing? So
Overall or in grocery?
overall for you and your whole portfolio across the country. So
Yeah, everybody's growing.
Okay.
There's very few tenants, I would say, that are struggling with the ability to have space full. The struggle is how do I get inventory moved in and moved out? And usually, often, the answer is with more warehouse space in more locations. I'd say that, you know, during COVID, just about everybody was timid about what was going to happen as a result of COVID. So I'm talking about April, May, June, July of 2020. If we had vacancy, we had plenty of demand, but everybody was timid, especially the 3PLs, and looking to us for 6-month leases, 1-year leases, or if they did longer, cancellation options, because they just didn't know if their contracts were going to last. So there's been a fundamental change since then, where folks are now willing to go with longer terms. But there was a period of time there where there was growth, but in an odd way. You know,
We felt that too.
Yeah. So the interesting thing about I think for a lot of people is understanding what Amazon is doing to the delivery business, and the fact that their well publicized move to control the entire supply chain and do their own delivery, and how they had this contract with FedEx Ground for so many years, and then they canceled in 2018, and everybody went, "Oh my God, FedEx is going to die on the vine." Well, everybody thought that except FedEx, who kind of chuckled and said, "Well, Amazon was only 3% of our business." So there's plenty of folks trying to move inventory around the country besides Amazon. The fact is, every retailer has to sell through Amazon, but they also hate selling through Amazon. They want to be able to sell directly themselves, and that's driving a lot of that demand.
And that's actually an interesting thing that we've really seen in our portfolio, is that everybody talks about e-com, e-com, e-com. One of the big trends that we've seen is selling direct to the consumer. Mm-hmm. So a lot of brands, whether it's apparel, they have their typical channels, but they're also, selling it direct to their consumer and developing that relationship to the customer. So one of the things that I think is on everybo's mind as a developer, as an investor, as a logistics provider, is just to talk about labor a little bit. So Doug, I know you could take this a lot of ways, but why don't you I'll keep it very broad, and you can dive in how you see fit.
Okay, I could talk about this for about a month.
And I'll have a bunch of follow-ups for you guys so we could pass it around.
So most of the labor in our world is typically our warehousing people, our drivers and truck drivers, and we have a fleet of about 100 drivers with tractor trailers, as well as some delivery vans, and then we contract a lot out. During COVID, everything went way down, and not just us, but a lot of the partners that we carry the freight with. So we might hire FedEx Freight, for example, and we have a contract with them at a certain time. So April of last year, it was just down in the basement. Nobody was barely running and delivering and so forth. The marketplace just catapulted dramatically.
So give us some context, like how far down? Were we 40% of peak, or when you go back? Or?
From peak prior COVID time, it's about 45% in terms of what happened to the marketplace, the whole logistics marketplace. And I think everybody was feeling, and again, part of that was how do we all navigate through this? Whether you're a union shop or non-union shop or what have you. What happened during this downturn is on the trucking side of the world, a lot of those drivers said, I think I'm going to retire now. Now, there's already been a looming truck driver shortage that we've been talking about for about the last 15 years, and we've been predicting it would happen. So, boom, it happened in that valley. As the business catapulted up, all of us are scrambling for rehiring truck drivers. I just lost 20%. Just a quick factoid, most trucking companies today have approximately a 90% average turnover rate in their truck drivers. It's that phenomenally high. So you're constantly churning. It's very, if you're truly an over the road where your truck drivers aren't at home, most of those are well over 100%. So labor is tough. It's been more difficult with navigating minimum wage. So let me think, in 2019, I believe our minimum wage was $12 in the city of Denver. First of the year, it's going to go up to $15.87. That's just minimum wage. Forget the marketplace and attracting people that are getting their federally subsidized unemployment checks. So finding people and getting them off the bench has been a monumental task for most of our HR, and most companies that I know have actually added probably 10 to 15% in terms of resource in their HR department to continue to find and attract and retain the critically important labor that you need to operate your business.
Especially drivers, right?
The drivers is still today a very, probably the most critically important factor that's going to affect all of us in the room and so forth. And part of that is, we'll use FedEx Freight as an example. About 2 months ago, FedEx Freight said, I don't want your business to 1,400 customers. Unprecedented. They literally just said, I got too much freight, and I don't have enough drivers, and I don't have enough dock space, and I don't have enough equipment. You guys are kind of my lower bottom stuff. I'm done. That's happening in the trucking business today. So if you're not what we refer to in the industry as a shipper of choice, hey, you might have a great truck line and relationship, but if they don't want to do business and it's not as collaborative, the freight doesn't get moved. And as Paul was talking about, in this omni-channel world, that's happening at truckload places, less than truckload places, and also down on the parcel and as Paul's referred to as the last mile. So it's a challenge, and we project it will continue to be a challenge for, we're looking out at least another 12 months before we see some leveling off on where it's going to end.
Oh, only 12 months. Let's keep it going.
Can I ask a question? Doug, I don't know what might bring an end to driver shortages. I'd be really curious to hear your perspective on that. I know that the American Transportation Research Institute predicts that by 2028, the driver shortage numbers are going to be in the 160,000 range. 160,000 drivers short of need by 2028. Trucking companies, logistics companies, folks like you, I understand, are turning yourselves inside out to figure out how to get more drivers, changing benefits packages, trying to figure out ways to get truckers their miles, but also let them spend the night at home and take their pets on the road with them and all this other stuff that I keep hearing about. What do you think brings an end to the driver shortage problem?
Well, unfortunately, I think, first of all, I agree with your numbers, and those sound about right on track for what we see. I honestly think that the companies that will survive in the transportation business are those that change the way they do business, so that some of that shortage is created in the truckload environment by drivers not having a quality of life. They can't get home. They really can't make an established family because they're out on the road. So right now, many of these networks are hub and spoke, and or some people are running all around. I see what will change in that is lanes of shuttles, to where you'll go about 400 miles and the most a driver will be gone is somewhere around maybe a day. And that's just a piece of it. Now you're still going to have the same shortage, but you're going to slice off a piece of that. Autonomous trucks are probably not going to happen in at least what I'm seeing. We're probably 10 years out before we have any real integration of a driverless truck. There's still a lot of homework to be done, and living in Denver as we do, I think there's a lot of testing to be done with snowstorms and everything with what we have to deal with. The other aspect of it is a change in channels, and where those drivers are going to be, a CDL driver is gold, and that's the guys that drive the bigger trucks. So anything from a tractor trailer to anything that weighs 26,000 pounds or more. The driver shortage is, and this goes into what we call supply chain design, and it can happen on a global basis, a national basis, or even on a local basis. So it's really how many warehouses, how many inventories, and to piggyback on what Paul said earlier, how we actually advise the companies to put what item in what location, when, and get it delivered in a vehicle that doesn't require a CDL person. So that's really part of the 160,000 that we're trying to revamp. And that's at least, hopefully that answers your question a little bit.
And one little piece of insight that I'll share, I sat on an airplane the other day, and I sat next to a truck driver, and one of the things he told me is that one of his most common runs is from California, from Fontana, was running from Fontana to Las Vegas. And he said he won't take heavy loads anymore from Fontana to Las Vegas because of the topography with all the up and down. And he says he has enough work and he doesn't want to do it. And he just told his customers, and like you said, FedEx turning business down. But Chris, I wanted to go back to you, is just to talk about how kind of labor impacts retail and how it's kind of changing some of the concepts that you guys are seeing.
Yeah, I think we see it from a different perspective. We're seeing it from the tenants, and then also us in the middle of construction and cities. I mean, construction and development takes a team. It's just not the developer, it's design, it's the cities, and the tenant all working together. And I think that's the first one that we've seen. I've got a project in the mountains right now, and that's the first one we've seen the most impact from COVID. Mainly it's the mountains too, so throw that in there. That doesn't help it. But cities are really understaffed. They can't keep up.
We definitely will get to some municipal challenges too. That's coming here soon.
And then that same project is a Sierra Trading and a TJ Maxx. They're opening in early November, and their typical hiring process is, they start about 30 days out and they try to get a team. Well, this one, I was just talking to the district manager, and they need over 100, 120 people. And you're saying 120 people in Silverthorne, wow, you better start this now so you can actually be staffed. And I think what's going to end up happening is they're going to have to just bring temporary people. They're going to drive because they're not going to be able to execute that type of hiring in time. And that goes even to the small guys. I was with a convenience store last week, and he is a franchisee of a 7-Eleven. He operates 2 locations. His business got hit 40% during COVID because it was so focused on schools and commuters. He's back, but he's operating 2 stores with 3 people. I mean, and if you think of a 7-Eleven, I mean, he's working 80, 90 hours a week just to keep up. So it's almost every piece of the industry. Restaurants can't, and you're seeing it all over headlines, right? I'm not restating anything that everybody's already feeling, but even restaurants can't find qualified staff or anybody that really wants to take that role back. So they're changing their hours and adjusting how much they're open. So I think it's been really interesting to see businesses try to make the change, but still accommodate customers as much as they can.
And so from a a project design standpoint, I'm just curious, is that you mentioned the P.F. Chang's concept from 5,000 to a 1,000 square foot delivery concept, and is some of that driven by labor?
I really think it is, because it's if you're trying to operate a 5,000 square foot restaurant, I mean, just the amount of employees that you need to open from 5 p.m. to midnight is enormous. But operating 1,000 square feet and it's mostly a to-go, you're taking out almost your entire front of the house. So I think that's really impactful here. Is people are trying to say, how do I make my business sustainable? And that's, yes, I have operating expenses that I need to try to control, but it's also staffing. Yeah. And if I only have to hire 10 people versus 50 for a new store, I can maintain 10. And if I have some turnover, and how do I manage through that? Great, but I'm not doing that with 50 people.
Great, and so we're going to go to opportunity. So Paul, to pass it to you, I mean, where do you see opportunity for warehouse development and acquisition?
Yeah, it's across the board, John. It's as you know, there's demand through the roof. It's probably, in my estimation, the lowest risk time for vacant lease up in history in industrial space, especially for distribution space. And so you're going to need a lot more facilities in intermodal locations. You're going to need a lot more facilities in port locations. But you're really going to need a lot more in the way of last mile locations to have more inventory closer to people. And so the opportunity is, where can we provide those locations in the most cost-effective way? And part of what Chris was talking about earlier, as it relates to the redesigning of the store, is related to omni-channel, being able to have inventory in your store that you can get to a customer directly. And maybe that means you're shrinking your showroom. I mean, traditionally, the old traditional model for a product store was 20% inventory space, 80% floor space. Well, if I've got to get more of my products to people's doorsteps, then maybe 20% becomes 30%, becomes 40%. Sooner or later, correct me if I'm wrong, but I got to believe someone genius in a boardroom is going to say, why are we paying $50 a square foot for space that's predominantly warehouse space? Why don't I go pay X dollars for warehouse space? And that opportunity, that means, when I translate it to warehouse, is, okay, if I can get a good location, a location that minimizes transportation costs for the folks that are delivering the product, because it's close to population densities, and it's an alternative to paying $40, $50 a square foot for effectively warehouse space in a store. What is the rent threshold, right? At what point can I say, well, gee, I can go pay $40, $50, $60 a square foot for land and build a property that's going to cost $200 a square foot to construct, and in exchange, I'm going to need rents that are, $15 a square foot. At what point does the retailer say, yeah, I still want that space, that warehouse space, at that price point, because it's cheaper than the alternative? And now that I'm trying to go direct to consumer, like you said, John, earlier, that really becomes important. So there's an opportunity there, if we can figure out the math and understand where the thought processes are in the retail sector. And some of that's going to flow down to third-party logistics contracts. And Doug, before the meeting, you said you're the low-hanging fruit when it comes to paying rent. I get that. You have to service a contract. If you have a facility that you have to overpay for rent, you're not going to have that contract. So there's a really delicate balance, but the opportunity there is to find well-located sites that minimize transportation costs for logistics providers, and allow for the opportunity to have more delivery closer to people. So that's a big one.
That's a very good point. And Doug, and I want to get back to kind of the industrial and retail mix here in a minute. But first, Doug, if we were in Long Beach right now, is looking at the coast at the Port of Long Beach, what would it look like?
Clogged with large boats. Right now, in part of our supply chain effect that we're feeling today, post-COVID, is what we call the Bullwhip Effect. And so we already got slapped. We've seen a whole bunch of product coming in, but we really didn't realize that some of these plants, when they came back on, they had a greater manufacturing capacity. So the Port of LA Long Beach, which is the U.S. largest port, is literally 44% more volume today than at its peak prior to COVID. And that's hard to comprehend. And so then they're dealing with the same issues with labor, in having to deal with people out on quarantine, not as much resource. So today there's about 45 vessels containing 5,000 to 15,000 what we call TEUs waiting to be unloaded at the port. And that's before it even comes inland. So then the railroad capacity, much of that traffic gets picked up and they put them on rail cars. There's not as much rail capacity now either. So the containers just sit there and they'll queue until, hey, there's capacity available, and then they'll come. Those of us that are impatient, we say, I'm not going to wait for the railroad. Unload that container, find somebody like us or anybody, unload the content, we'll put it in a truck and we'll drive it to Denver or Chicago or wherever its ultimate destination is. Pretty expensive to do that, but that's what's happening. And then when you do get your product, now one of the challenges we see is overcapacity. And I bet we have ourselves 150,000 square feet of requirement just in Denver for additional product coming into Denver for our existing customers. You feel like Lucy taking the cakes off of the conveyor belt. It's just too much. And that's literally what's happening to us. One of the other issues affecting California, and this is a legislative initiative, and it's basically a California Bill 2305, and what the requirement for that is, there's a tax that's going to be applied on warehouses, and this is primarily in the Southern California base in the LA area. And what it equates to is the California legislature has pretty much said, I'm not going to tax a truck because it's creating a bad environment. I'm going to tax the warehouse because that's where the truck is going to. Not right sure I understand that logic, but it's California. So anyway, it amounts to about $1 a square foot, which isn't killer, but in a guy like my business, I'm passing it on to customer X and customer Y, and they're starting to use that in their formulas about whether I do or don't want to stay in Southern California. I think it affects about 4,000, 5,000 physical industrial properties. So, but I don't see that ending in California, and I think that's something that's going to be on all of our radar, and something we have to figure out as we're trying to figure out where these warehouses go. There may be the implementation. Long ago, there used to be an inventory tax. Okay, we don't have one in Colorado. Okay, but where there's a route for money, you never know where the legislation may come. And it, as we learned very quickly through all of COVID, legislation can happen fast, and it can have a deep impact on our bottom lines.
And we're going to get some more into challenges here in a minute. But to stay positive probably for one last question, so we'll go back to Chris. So for Chris, is You and I had a discussion prepping for this, and we had talked about, the anchors are changing from your traditional big box store, and also as how that's changing how you master plan sites going forward. So give us a little insight at Kentro to where you guys are active and you're always designing something new, building something new. What's on the books now, and what do you guys have going?
The project at Colorado and Arkansas is probably our best example. We've been planning that now for 3 years. We've got through the COVID experience, and to see how that's really impacted us, I think the consumer can go buy a good and get it delivered to them with no experience, and it's easy, so it's transactional. So we can't be that anymore, where the typical grocery anchored center was you're coming to go to the grocery store, maybe you go get a haircut, maybe you go get your nails done. That was really what was driving traffic to you. I do still think that's an important piece of it, but now I think consumers are looking for experience. They want to come to an area or a retail shop or what other people are doing, interactive art museums, or try to bring people in through the experience that they're going to have. So, for example, with that site, we've been trying to think through you have an anchor, you have creative open space, you have restaurants. What else can you do? And then you throw social media and Instagrammable moments into it that you still have to consider that, because that's another big piece of what consumers want. They really do want to be able to post things online and say, this is something cool I'm doing. And how does that shape your experience that you're receiving? I think the other thing that's interesting is there's a concept out of New York that's called Showfield. And that's actually kind of, I think all of us feel the pain of, it's e-commerce meets bricks and mortar. So Showfield's real concept is they take a 14,000 square foot store and they basically sublease 100 square feet to e-commerce that don't typically have brick and mortar. And they're really trying to program a shop that you as the consumer can go see 100 different concepts that you wouldn't normally touch and feel, but you can go do that. And it changes hands every 6 months. You don't get to stay there longer. It's almost like a glorified farmer's market, the way I kind of think about it, but for e-commerce. Just another idea of how do I bring somebody to me and curate something different to create that experience for people. So I think everybody keeps talking about that experience, but I think if you follow the old adage of just, I'm going to build a grocer, I'm going to build a market, I'm going to build a theater, it'll solve my other issues. I don't think that's what people want anymore. They want to feel like they're part of a neighborhood. They want to feel like they're getting that experience out of whatever they're doing for hours or 2 hours of their life, or that if they don't find it, just order on Amazon and it'll get delivered to them, right? That's really the catalyst that we have to work through.
And Paul, you had touched on it a little bit, is kind of the mix between in the retail store and in the warehouse. And I get asked regularly about conversions of big box retail space to warehouse. And so now we can start to get into the challenges section. Ken Harshman sitting right there, I think he could come up and talk for a month about it. But as for somebody that's tried to convert a big box store to a warehouse format, it's not necessarily easy type of thing. So let's talk about some of the challenges.
Yeah. So the primary challenge, I would say, is found in the municipality. The fact is, the greatest demand for last mile delivery is in the fastest growing cities in the country and the fastest growing population centers within those cities. And that is having that's having the impact of allowing a lot of older areas to gentrify and become, redeveloped and vibrant again, or for the first time. And that's creating a dichotomy. That's creating a conflict. The people that are in the fastest growing cities are usually the younger generations that are more inclined to buy things online in the first place and want it delivered very quickly. So you have a municipality that says, gee, here's this old shopping center. A developer comes along and says, I want to redevelop that old shopping center that's 50% vacant or 100% vacant. It's an eyesore. Don't you guys want to do something with this shopping center because it's in a great location for delivery? well, getting them to say, well, that means we're going to give up tax revenue because we're down zoning from retail where we get, enormous rents and enormous tax revenue, and we're going to down zone to a warehouse that where you get 30% of that tax revenue. Good luck taking that money out of the municipality's hands. And so that's a big challenge right there is where's the money? The second piece of that is neighborhoods. And we were talking before this meeting, some neighborhoods can get pretty crazy when you're talking about changing zoning, especially to industrial, because what do they think? Trucks. I don't want trucks in the neighborhood, right? And so municipalities, again, and neighborhoods don't want to see dock doors for some reason. I think they're beautiful. But anyway, they don't like to see dock doors. But here's the issue, and I'll use an example from here in Colorado. We were pursuing a site, an infill greenfield site that was just a terrific last mile delivery location surrounded by a wealthy population. And we wanted to change the zoning to allow for distribution from what that city was calling light industrial. But by golly, this city was adamant that they didn't want trucks in the neighborhood. And I said, well, hang on. This particular site is located very close to the highway. And the neighborhood that this facility will serve is generally to the north and to the east. So your 53-foot tractor trailer that's going to come and fill those buildings with inventory to be delivered is going to come in from the highway, go to the site, and go right back out to the highway. Then what goes into the neighborhoods is a delivery van. So you can get your package that you ordered online in overnight delivery. What's wrong with that? Oh, trucks, too many trucks. We don't want trucks. We don't want to. You gotta disguise the frontage so that we don't see all those dock doors. But ultimately, they put so many restrictions on the site that it made it clear they really wanted flex product. They really wanted. They basically put limitations on anything that was less than 20% office finish. And I'll tell you, in a distribution facility, you need 3% office finish, 5% maybe. So they wanted local service companies, not delivery companies, because of those trucks and those dock doors. Even though they completely misunderstood how it was going to work, they just wouldn't budge. So that's a big challenge. It's an example of a recent situation that we couldn't solve. Take that to the extreme where a municipality, you find a great site for distribution, and the municipality says, we want walkable retail with apartments above it. Okay, good luck getting a distribution center. But all those people want their packages. There's the dichotomy.
Yeah. And so obviously this is an educational event, and Doug, talking to you, as I learned a lot getting ready for this. And so being somebody that builds warehouses, and we're always trying to think is, where do our tenants want to be? How are they reviewing this? You gave me a really interesting stat per dollar of rent, the accompanying transportation costs. Can you kind of touch on that a little bit?
Sure. So when we do location modeling analysis for customers, clients, and so forth, depending upon the product and vertical and now channel that we're dealing with, we look at really the transportation. But first is population, then it's transportation, because the transportation dollar spend to move this bottle of water is typically 7 to 12 times the cost what we have in our warehouse. So there's a lot of things that go into that. Now, if you want that same bottle of water in an hour or less, that could be $15 or $20. If you want it in a day or less, gosh, that could be $6 to $7. It just, so that analysis of when we actually want something after we order it really falls into play with what we're trying to figure out is where to build product and so forth, where to place warehouses. And so that, and again, we basically do that as a supply chain analysis. All of that goes into place. Now, where you ultimately end up with is going to be run by the consumer. I think everybody loves their groceries real quick. I don't know that I need to order a suit jacket and have it in my house in 2 hours. Is 2 days acceptable? Is 4 days acceptable? And that, I don't think, has been figured out yet, quite frankly. I think we're still trying to figure out the COVID, where this thing is going to fall into place. And we know there's an awful lot of fulfillment and everything going on the e-com channel. We all seem to like it from consumers. It's not going like this after, you know, we all went back to work, basically. It's holding pretty steady, as Paul said.
That's pretty interesting. So if I'm understanding correctly, so $1 in rent to get it in a day is $6 to $7 in transportation costs.
Yeah, and again, it's rent and the handling cost in the warehouse and so forth. So, because it has to pay for me and you and all of your equipment and racking and so forth. Now, the other part of that cost goes into what channel is that you're servicing. If I'm shipping full pallets of water to Amazon, for example, well, that changes that denominator quite substantially. If I'm shipping one bottle on behalf of Amazon to Paul or Chris, that's a much different situation. The amount of infrastructure we put inside the building, because once we do that analysis inside the building, we go through that same computation of, do I want a 36,
and we're getting
Whoop.
there. Don't you worry.
Okay, never mind.
So
Okay.
it is, so we'll go right into it. So as
Okay.
you and I had talked about Class A versus Class B warehouse, and knowing that I see your ACME signs out east, you guys have some what I'd refer to as Class B product, not the modern high cube facilities. So how do you evaluate the two and look at them compared to each other? And then Paul, you can kind of chime in on that yourself.
Thank you. So speaking strictly from a third-party logistics provider, a lot of it, our decisioning is based upon the contract and its runway, its duration, the product, and the intensity. Every day, we could potentially want a 36 clear building. Now, if I go back to the example of pallets of water for Amazon, if you can imagine storing things in racking up 6, 8 levels high, that works pretty good for your storage efficiency. But if I have to go in and out of that design 10,000 times a week, I may have offset that efficiency in storage, because now, remember, I'm paying a higher rate to hire and retain the labor, as well as the equipment to serve. Once you get much over about 28 feet tall in a building, the equipment cost goes up substantially.
And what type of equipment are we talking about, too, just to give some context?
Sure. So there's all sorts of really cool automation that we can or can't do. In one of our facilities, we're dealing with equipment that goes up above to either raise a person or raise product, that can go above 28 feet. And again, where you might spend $40,000 for a piece of equipment, this is pre-COVID, that's where my mind is, it would be $100,000 for that same piece of equipment. So your efficiency really is trying to create that storage. If I have to go in and out a lot, I'm really not sure that I want to spend $2 million on a conveying system with a robot that's going to do that for me if my contract is only 3 years with the customer. And but the good news is, if I'm in the real estate business, I want to hitch my wagon to those people, whether it's a third-party logistics company or a company that loves that automation in the warehousing, because the heavy investment is likely to be a great renewal for that same lease. They're not going to go many places unless they've just completely blown the walls out. The amount of investment and infrastructure in that really ties the hands of the tenant.
And so, Paul, do you want to kind of piggyback on that? Do you have any thoughts of kind of A versus B as an investor and a developer where you see opportunity?
Yes, you have to just take a very big picture view of the products that are getting delivered to your home or to the store. There's all kinds of different products, and some of them need to be turned quickly. Let's take grocery, for example, the quickest turn product that there is, the most perishable inventory you can have. Things in a grocery store don't stay around very long. You know, soft goods perhaps, but certainly anything perishable, the idea is to move it in and move it out as fast as you can. So in the grocery business, you're not concerned about clear height so much because you're not racking anything. There's a lot of other products where you're perhaps not moving goods very, very quickly, and you're going to need clear height to rack it. There's other types of goods and other types of operations that move very quickly. We have we had a conversation when we bought the old Sears building, the Denver Urban Business Center. We were breaking it into 4 units, and one of the spaces was only 16 clear. And Ken will remember this issue quite clearly because it was all about how high can a user rack. And so we went down the road with trying to come up with costs to lift the roof. How high do we need to lift the roof? Raise it from 16 to 28 or 32. And thinking that that's what we would need to do in order to get a tenant. Well, along comes one of the biggest logistics companies in the world, Ryder Logistics, a 3PL, saying, nothing in this warehouse sticks around for more than 24 hours. It comes in, it goes around on conveyors, it gets repackaged, it goes back out the door. We don't rack anything. 16 clear is fine for us. Wow, that was surprising. But there's a lot of product, and especially in the business of e-commerce, there's a lot of stuff that really needs to move quickly, in which case you don't have to have a lot of rack space. Class B warehouse is not dead. There is going to be a place for lower rent, lower clear, but functional distribution buildings for as far as the eye can see. Automation actually, Doug, to your point, it doesn't, as much as it seems counterintuitive, automation doesn't actually solve the labor problem. You can have plenty of robotics doing shelf picking for you, but the fact that you are now, as an e-commerce warehouse, and if you're automated so that you can go clear height and still get stuff moved very, very quickly, you still have thousands of SKUs to process instead of dozens. And that means labor, ultimately. So coming in and going out is still a big part of operating a warehouse. In fact, I just saw yesterday Amazon's planning on hiring 2,700 more people in Denver. Where do you think those people are going to work? They're going to work in the warehouses. So automation and clear height do not necessarily mean that that's the future of all warehouse space. Mm-hmm. But there's absolutely a high demand for higher clear Class A with all the accoutrements, especially if they've got trailer storage. That's a big deal these days.
And we're gonna get to there real quick in 1 minute, but I want to pass on to Chris. Is that we don't want industrial to cannibalize the conversation. So is that we've talked a little bit about automation, but is automation technology, is it influencing any of your design? And it's just, you touched on is, the trend of whether it's coffee or the quick serves going to, double drive-throughs and things like that. And, I read the other day that some of the dining rooms are shut again because of the Delta variant. But what are you seeing for technology or automation, if any?
The interesting piece is I think everybody's trying to go there. You actually have like Bank of America is rolling out a whole new concept. We built one at Colorado and Kentucky. It's no employees. It's 1,500 feet. You can do a transaction like you would if you went into a typical bank. So you're doing it through TVs and you're doing it through screens and automation. You enter with an ATM. So legitimately, they don't even have one employee ever there. They don't even provide a bathroom to you. So it's just a very different concept. And it's, when I was building it, I was like, oh man, is this really going to catch on? And then a year later, they went into a shopping center in Commerce City doing the exact same thing. So it's an interesting concept. You look at Bird Call, a restaurant that was started here. Their whole push is reducing labor and making it. I don't know if a lot of people have been there, but you go in and you order on an iPad. Basically, they put a number and you go and grab your food from. You don't deal with people. Yes, they have people for drive-throughs and they're back at a house, but again, you're just trying to take one or two people out of the mix in your typical use. I think grocery is a good example. It doesn't really impact our business, but you can see how they analyze their customers, and you have a King Soopers card. For sure, they know everything that you're doing in that store, how long you're staying at that spot, and how does that shape and fold their store and their design behind it. So I think technology is integrated in it. It's just how do you might not look and feel it like you would typically, like what we're talking about, automation on your guys' side. And I think it's going to keep going there. It's just how do you keep up, and where is it practical, where you're still, I keep coming back to the experience in retail because that's really what you need. And you still need that experience to and that customer service that you're providing.
So, well, Paul, you mentioned trailer parking there, and so we'll start with Doug. We talked about A versus B, and the other thing that I just wanted to talk about is trends that are happening that may or may not be coming sooner or later. What are your thoughts of what might be coming that can really impact building design and how you as a user of space actually use the space?
Sure. Thank you. And we love B and C buildings. So our space and what we see in the marketplace is probably driven partially by transportation with the length of vehicles that may or may not be coming down the road from a legislative approval. You may have heard, instead of a 28-foot pup, we've been trying to lobby for a 33-foot trailer as one of those efforts to combat the driver shortage. Right now, that's still not happening, and we're still working on it, but that is something to have your radar up, because that's going to affect the apron where you're making the parking, as well as the actual allocation for parking space. I wouldn't bet on it, but it's something to have your ear to the ground for. Electric trucks are, I would say, much more, and I'm not talking the Amazon delivery vans, I'm talking the big tractor trailers. We do see that coming, and if you're going to be developing or redeveloping a facility, that is something that will, I think, require some attention. Part of that is how to, from a financial standpoint, justify there's going to be a huge amount of power that needs to be placed in the facility, as well as, depending upon the velocity going in and out of the building, those trucks that are parked and charging may not be able to be parked in a dock door, taking up that valuable space for all this product going in and out that we all want in 6 minutes. So that's really a design where charging stations, and what I'm seeing and reading and hearing from the truck manufacturers is the power drain for to recharge a big vehicle that'll run about 150 miles, and so that would be locally kind of run, is about equivalent to 1.5 months utility cost of an average home. So it's a big investment But on the other hand, you know, if everybody starts adopting these, there will probably be some huge tax on Xcel and the entire power grid to create that energy. We saw some of that, I think, just with marijuana, on what it does to a power source and a drain on resource at an industrial and or even a retail establishment. So hopefully that answers your question.
So basically, we need a place, one, to put the trucks while they're charging, and then we have to get the power there to actually charge them.
Yeah, right. It neither exists just yet.
Okay.
So if you have a fleet, let's say you convert 20 trucks, that's a pretty heavy unit that you're going to have to convert that power, and you're going to have a really nice conversation with Xcel on how to get the power there in the first place.
And is one thing to add, I think, is that it's that if you were to create, you know, a yard today for trailer storage, I think with stormwater requirements, it's about 28 trucks per acre that you could put on. So is that you're telling me that there's going to be a lot of acres in the middle of the city we need to charge trucks? So Paul, anything to add there?
Solar. The cost of solar is pretty expensive from time to time. Frankly, the cost of solar is directly related to chip demand. But the idea that you could maybe add power to your facility using solar that could potentially be adequate enough to allow for some charging stations is something that we've been looking into.
So solar with a battery to have some way to store it? Or?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. Because at the end of the day, adding power to an existing building that doesn't already have it is a much more extreme expense, particularly if you're not close to a substation. So I think, I don't know that that's the answer, but it's something that we're looking into as a solution. I agree that the electric trucks are coming soon, relatively soon, but they're not going to all of a sudden be the entire fleet in overnight. So if you have 50 dock positions and you can schedule the electric trucks to occupy 10 of those dock positions at any given time, and then gradually over the course of time increase your amount of charging capability, that's probably the way it's going to come down. It's not just going to go from gas to electric overnight.
So Chris, you obviously deal with a lot of national retailers, and are you getting a push for things like solar and car charging stations for vehicles?
It's more driven by the municipality, I would say. I think Denver is the perfect example of they're starting to really integrate it into their code. And that's from industrial to retail to multifamily. How are you building for the future? We have actually an affordable housing project going. We're breaking ground in 30 days, and that was a really interesting example of what the city was really trying to push on the new standard. And it's for seniors, 55 plus, very deep affordability. Many people don't have cars. And it was still mandated to have every stall that would at least have the infrastructure in place to convert to electric and provide 2 charging stations. So you think about, for us on that one, your affordable housing is very low end. You can't afford a lot. So you're throwing in a lot of infrastructure that really will probably be unused, but it's what the city wants. I think from the user's perspective, you're not seeing a lot of it yet. You're not seeing a lot of push unless you're a convenience store gas station. I think some users like Come and Go is already starting to install charging stations as an amenity, even though it's not, again, for their business. They're not making money really off of it, but it's an amenity to be able to have a stop and pull in, and you're getting the sales. Because if you're charging your car, you might be there for an hour. You're going to go grab a sandwich. So it's more of how are you integrating it in your overall business. I think long term, it's going to be that amenity that you need to be able to provide, though. Yeah, if you're a grocery, somebody's shopping for an hour and a half, they could go charge their car. I think that's, again, offering an amenity.
So before we go to Q&A, how about this is that we get one prediction of a trend that for you guys, maybe with the supply chain, and Chris, for you, for retail. And, you know, it can be robotics, an investment theme. You know, what do you think one thing that's potentially coming to your industry? And it could be far out, it could be near.
I think ours is kind of boring, to be honest, but I think in the end it's going to be how does the last mile really start affecting buildings? And you're seeing it a little bit, but I think, are we going to go into a grocery store that's 1,000 feet on the front end with very limited supply and almost the entire back house is last mile because everybody's ordering online? I think that's going to be the biggest piece. And then how are people surviving with the rents that have to be charged in an urban setting? I think seeing those two things come together over the next 10 years is going to be the most interesting piece of it.
That's really interesting. Paul?
I'm going to, I could go in so many different directions, but I'm going to say dark stores for grocery are coming. Originally concept developed in London in 2012. First store there opened, and it was literally a warehouse where the inside was laid out like a grocery store. And online orders would come in, and people would go down the aisles and fill shopping bags and take shopping bags to vans for delivery. The first dark store made it to the United States in New York City in 2018. Very similar concept, but it's not popular yet because people were very resistant to buying groceries online, and still are, even post-COVID. Even though people got a lot more comfortable with it during COVID, there's still a lot of resistance to it. But it's a trend that's growing, especially because of COVID, because people are getting more comfortable with it. But the next generation of dark store, again, prototype London 2021, large warehouse, fully automated, robots going around and picking product, placing it into grocery bags, goes on a conveyor out to a delivery truck. Very low employee count, fully automated, refrigerated section. I've seen video of it. It's spectacular how they make this thing work. So that's the future of dark stores. Is the more people in the United States can continue to embrace ordering grocery online to have it delivered, the sooner we're going to see that in more and more cities.
Pretty hard keeping up with these guys. I'm going to take a big step. There's going to be a lot of inflation.
Yeah.
And quite frankly, the prediction, the way that we're looking at the future right now, I think further out you are right on the bullseye. Where I'm more worried about is that 1 to 5 years, because I don't really know what the rate of inflation is. If I give you just a couple examples, forget real estate taxes. Everybody already deals with all of that. One of the trucks that we're all talking about, again, if it's $100,000 before COVID and now it's $175,000 or $200,000.
This is for a new tractor.
This is for a new tractor. Forget the trailer, forget the people, forget any of the other costs. If inflation does go up, our costs are certainly going to go up. It will pass on to the consumer. I just don't know when the capital starts coming back out of the marketplace. And that's where we're taking somewhat of a conservative look. I think we're going to see a hesitation for approximately a year, depending upon what happens with the mu variant. And if we actually rid ourselves of COVID, I think we'll move towards that end goal faster. I think if we encounter a second or a third variant of that mu, I think behaviorally our culture is going to react very negatively to that, and that is where that investment money comes back a little bit, and it's not quite as open and available for making the investments that we like.
So questions. So, and then James, I don't know if you can help me, is to open it up to our virtual audience as well. I don't know if we have any questions from the chat feature, but if anybody in the room has questions for these guys, fire away.
I just had a quick question, probably for Doug and Paul. We didn't talk much. We talked a lot about grocery, but not as much about cold storage. Do you any separate trends around cold storage facilities?
Do you want to take that?
I'll start, but you would probably have a lot to say. I'll just suggest that cold storage demand has been accelerating dramatically as a function of more online grocery purchases. The need for it is spreading around to, the traditional distribution locations around the country, instead of just being in the low power areas of the country like they historically have been. But it's I believe it's about a 300 million square foot market nationally, and it could get to 400 or 500 million easily over the course of the next 3 to 5 years. So I think it's growing very rapidly.
I would agree with everything you just said. It is, no pun intended, hot market for cold storage.
Anybody else? Joe?
So it seems like the question I'm trying to answer is really either we can incur additional costs and keep the supply chain kind of similar to what it exists as today, or we can change it. And the demand side is driving us to get creative, like ghost kitchens, that kind of deal. So who gets cut out of it? So getting raw materials, so let's say you're making apple pies. So getting apples from Washington to point of sale for the apple pie guy, right? So my question as I'm kind of thinking out loud here is, why can't there be ghost kitchens around perishable places, and King Soopers kind of goes away because I'm going to be all my groceries delivered anyway. If I need somebody to make my Kung Pao chicken, that's a ghost chicken next to the perishable warehouse, so the distance is negligible. Or if it's a consumer product and there's onshoring happening, there's a guy that makes hats. So instead of the raw materials going to China from wherever it's grown to get manufactured through a whole supply chain, why can't it go to 20 different facilities across the U.S. and my hat gets made there by a hat guy, and he makes Black Diamond hats and Patagonia hats, and then it gets shipped on a van to my house, right? So yeah, ghost kitchens or soft goods. I mean, I think that can kind of apply to a bunch of. Can't get like wild Alaskan salmon made locally for obvious reasons, but I think that kind of applies to a shorter supply chain. And I don't know, I'm spitballing here, but thoughts?
I think from a retail perspective, it's also control, right? You have a product that you're putting out to the consumer, and there's an expectation about what you're going to receive. So I think if you start separating out, like let's just use Kroger for example, because it's probably the easiest one that we all know, and their new marketplace, which is a 100,000 square foot shopping center, really, right? And in there, they almost have a glorified food hall. Well, if they started subbing out that food and it's not to the degree or production that they would normally want, I think that hurts their brand. They're probably using those same people to make other things, so again, scalability. But I agree. I think, how do you start planning and what are you cutting out? And it really feels like what you're cutting out is that last bit of labor on the back end, right? When you're thinking about retail, you're really trying to reduce at the consumer experience, because you're saying I need to go from 100 employees to 10 if I'm going to, a 5,000 square foot restaurant or a 1,000 square foot restaurant. So I think that's really where you're seeing the reduction. I think for these guys, it's obviously automation and other things, but and it's just where you source product, and that's from a discount retailer to a grocery to a restaurant? How are you getting to the product, and who are your providers? I think that's why it's going to be a little hard. And I'm probably terrible at this because my wife orders all of our groceries. I still go to Whole Foods every Saturday with my son, and it's like an hour and a half of us just walking through and picking things. Like, I think it's just back to like the experience. I don't think we're ever going to get away from that, because you're always going to, people still want to get out, see people. You don't want to just be in your house and never leave. So I think you're still thrive for that type of energy, what you're doing. So I think it'll just be a different model of what you're doing, in my opinion.
Well, everybody, that's our time for this morning. So I just want to thank Chris, Paul, and Doug for joining us and your expertise. And thanks for sharing that with our NAIOP audience. Also, I'd like to thank our sponsors, Transwestern, The Whites Company, and Paulsonelli. A recording of today's presentation is going to be available on the NAIOP YouTube page later this week that you guys can watch again. And don't hesitate to share that. I know a lot of people would love to hear the perspective of these guys that are here. Mark your calendars also for October 20th for the next installment of the New Normal series that's going to be focused on office and multifamily, and that registration is now open for. We're really glad that you joined us, and we'll see you next time. So thank you.